Before 1979, the relationship between Iran and Israel looked very different. The two nations were not enemies. In fact, they were quiet partners in a complicated Middle East. Under the rule of the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran maintained a pragmatic and strategic alliance with Israel. This partnership was built on shared concerns about the influence of Arab nationalism and Soviet power in the region. They cooperated on military matters, shared intelligence, and even engaged in significant trade, particularly in the oil sector. For many observers at the time, this bond, though not always public, seemed like a stable fixture of regional politics, a counterweight to the more volatile dynamics playing out in neighboring Arab states. This era of cooperation, however, came to an abrupt and dramatic end with the Iranian Revolution in 1979. The revolution swept away the monarchy and brought a new leadership to power, headed by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. This new Islamic Republic of Iran was founded on principles that were fundamentally opposed to the old regime's worldview. It rejected the Shah's pro-Western alignment and introduced a new, revolutionary ideology. Central to this new identity was a staunch opposition to the State of Israel, which Ayatollah Khomeini famously labeled the Little Satan, a partner to the Great Satan, the United States. This ideological shift was not merely rhetorical. It marked a complete reversal of foreign policy, transforming a former ally into an implacable foe. The post-revolutionary government in Tehran swiftly cut all diplomatic and commercial ties with Israel. Israeli diplomats were expelled, and the Israeli embassy in Tehran was famously handed over to the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO. The new Iranian constitution enshrined support for oppressed peoples, a category in which the Palestinians featured prominently. This ideological commitment meant that Iran's opposition to Israel was no longer just a matter of policy, but a core tenet of its national identity. The conflict that would unfold over the subsequent decades was therefore not simply a dispute over territory or resources, but a clash of deeply held beliefs about the legitimate order of the Middle East and the world. From this point forward, the dynamic between the two nations was defined by hostility and mistrust. Israel, for its part, watched the rise of this new, ideologically driven enemy with growing alarm. The fall of the Shah had deprived it of a crucial regional partner and replaced it with a state that actively sought its destruction. This set the stage for a long and complex struggle, one that would be fought not on a traditional battlefield, but through a variety of indirect and often hidden means. The era of quiet partnership was definitively over, replaced by a Cold War that would simmer for decades before eventually boiling over into direct confrontation, changing the security landscape of the entire region in profound ways. For most of the decades following the 1979 revolution, the conflict between Iran and Israel was waged in the shadows. Direct military clashes were avoided, as both sides understood the immense risks of an all-out war. Instead, they engaged in a long and intricate struggle characterized by covert operations, assassinations, cyber attacks, and proxy warfare. This shadow war allowed each nation to undermine the other's interests without triggering a conventional military response. It was a war fought by spies, scientists, special forces, and computer hackers, far from the public eye, but with very real and deadly consequences. The rules of this conflict were unwritten, and the battle lines were constantly shifting, stretching from the digital world to the streets of foreign capitals. Israel's intelligence agencies, particularly the Mossad, were at the forefront of its efforts to counter the perceived threat from Iran. These efforts were multifaceted, aiming to disrupt Iran's military capabilities, sabotage its strategic programs, and weaken its regional influence. Operations often took the form of targeted assassinations against key figures. Scientists involved in Iran's nuclear program and senior military commanders, especially those from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, became primary targets. These killings were designed not only to eliminate specific individuals, but also to sow fear and paranoia within the Iranian establishment, slowing its progress and disrupting its command structure through a campaign of persistent psychological pressure. Iran, in turn, developed its own sophisticated methods for striking back at Israeli and Western interests. The Quds Force, an elite branch of the IRGC responsible for extraterritorial operations, became Tehran's primary tool for projecting power. It cultivated a network of allied militant groups across the Middle East, providing them with funding, weapons, and training. These groups, often referred to as proxies, allowed Iran to challenge Israel indirectly, creating a persistent threat along its borders. Beyond its proxy network, Iran also engaged in its own covert operations, which intelligence agencies have linked to plots against Israeli diplomats and tourists in various countries around the world, from Thailand to Argentina. This clandestine conflict also extended into the digital realm, making the Iran-Israel rivalry one of the world's first true cyber wars. Both nations invested heavily in their offensive and defensive cyber capabilities, targeting each other's critical infrastructure. One of the most famous examples was the Stuxnet computer worm, widely attributed to a joint United States-Israeli effort, which was unleashed in 2010. Stuxnet was designed to physically damage the centrifuges at Iran's Natanz uranium enrichment facility. Iran responded by developing its own cyber units, which have been blamed for attacks on Israeli water systems, government websites, and private companies. This digital battlefield became a new, invisible front in their long-running war. At the absolute center of the long and bitter conflict between Iran and Israel has been Iran's nuclear program. For Israel, the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran is considered an existential threat, a danger that must be prevented at all costs. Israeli leaders have consistently argued that a nuclear Iran would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Middle East, embolden its proxies, and pose a direct threat to Israel's survival. This conviction has driven a decades-long campaign of sabotage, diplomacy, and military threats aimed at dismantling or at least significantly delaying Tehran's nuclear ambitions. This focus has shaped nearly every aspect of Israeli strategic thinking and has been the primary justification for its most aggressive actions against Iran. In response to this perceived threat, Israel has engaged in a relentless series of covert operations targeting the heart of the Iranian nuclear program. The 2010 Stuxnet attack was a landmark event, demonstrating that a cyber weapon could inflict physical damage on a highly secured industrial facility. But the campaign did not stop there. Over the years, Iran has reported numerous mysterious explosions and fires at sensitive nuclear and military sites, including the Natanz and Fordow enrichment facilities. Many of these incidents, which caused significant setbacks, have been widely attributed to Israeli sabotage. This physical disruption was complemented by a campaign of assassinations targeting Iran's top nuclear scientists, most notably the 2020 killing of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who was eliminated by a remote-controlled machine gun. Iran has consistently maintained that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, such as energy generation and medical isotopes. It has pointed to its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, as proof of its benign intentions. However, its actions have often fueled international suspicion. The discovery of undeclared nuclear activities and materials, coupled with restrictions placed on inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, created deep mistrust. In 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, was signed between Iran and world powers, offering sanctions relief in exchange for strict limits on its nuclear activities. Israel, under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, vehemently opposed the deal, calling it a historic mistake that paved Iran's path to a bomb. The situation grew more volatile after the United States withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018 and reimposed crippling sanctions on Iran. In response, Iran began to progressively breach the limits set by the deal. It started enriching uranium to higher levels of purity, moving from the 3.67% allowed under the agreement to 20%, and then to 60% in 2021, a level that is just a short technical step away from weapons-grade materials. This escalation, combined with the IAEA's declaration on June 12, 2025, that Iran was non-compliant with its NPT obligations for the first time in 2 decades, set the stage for a dramatic and dangerous new phase in the long-running nuclear standoff. A defining feature of Iran's strategy against Israel has been its cultivation of an axis of resistance. This is a network of state and non-state actors across the Middle East that share Iran's opposition to Israel and the United States. Rather than confronting Israel's powerful military directly, Iran built up this alliance to wage an asymmetric and indirect war. By arming, funding, and training these groups, Tehran was able to encircle its adversary with hostile forces, creating persistent security threats on multiple fronts. This proxy network became the primary instrument of Iranian foreign policy, allowing it to project power far beyond its borders and challenge the regional order without risking a direct conventional war with a superior military force. The most powerful and sophisticated of these proxies is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Founded with Iranian assistance in the 1980s, Hezbollah evolved from a small militia into a formidable military and political force that effectively controls large parts of Lebanon. It possesses a vast arsenal of rockets and missiles capable of striking deep inside Israel, creating a significant deterrent. For decades, Hezbollah served as Iran's forward operating base on Israel's northern border, engaging in a low-intensity conflict that occasionally erupted into full-scale war, as it did in 2006. The group's deep integration into Lebanese society and its powerful military wing made it the crown jewel of Iran's proxy network and a constant source of concern for Israeli defense planners. In the Palestinian territories, Iran found another willing partner in Hamas, the militant group that governs the Gaza Strip. While Hamas is a Sunni organization with its own independent ideology, it received substantial support from Shia Iran, united by their common enemy. This support included funding, weapons, and technical expertise that helped Hamas build up its rocket capabilities and conduct attacks against Israel. The Hamas-led attack on October 7, 2023, which triggered a devastating war in Gaza, highlighted the deadly effectiveness of this strategy. Although Iran denied direct involvement in planning the attack, its long-standing role as Hamas's primary patron was widely acknowledged as a key enabling factor for the group's military operations. The network extended further, encompassing other groups across the region. In Syria, Iran provided critical support to President Bashar al-Assad's regime during the country's civil war, using the conflict as an opportunity to establish a military foothold and open a new front against Israel. In Iraq, various Shia militias backed by Iran targeted United States forces and also posed a potential threat to Israel. In Yemen, the Houthi movement, though more independent, also received Iranian support and demonstrated its ability to strike targets hundreds of miles away, including shipping in the Red Sea and targets in Israel itself. This sprawling network of allies allowed Iran to wage a multi-front war by proxy, creating a ring of fire around its primary adversary. The long-simmering shadow war between Iran and Israel, really began to boil over in the period following the October 7, 2023 Hamas attack. That event triggered a brutal war in Gaza and, set off a chain reaction of escalating violence across the entire region. Israel, determined to dismantle the threat posed by Iran's proxies, intensified its military campaign far beyond its previous scope. This new, more aggressive posture aimed not just to contain the threat, but to actively degrade and destroy the so-called axis of resistance. The undeclared rules that had governed the shadow war for decades began to break down, replaced by a cycle of direct and increasingly bold attacks that, honestly, pushed the two nations closer to the brink of open conflict. Throughout late 2023 and into 2024, Israel carried out a series of high-profile strikes against Iranian and proxy targets. In December 2023, an Israeli airstrike in Syria killed a senior Iranian general, Sayed Razi Mousavi, who was a key figure in coordinating the Iran-Syria military alliance. This was not the first time Israel had killed a senior Iranian commander, but it was part of a clear and accelerating pattern. The campaign reached a new peak in 2024 with the assassination of Hezbollah's longtime leader, Hassan Nasrallah, in a strike on his Beirut headquarters. The elimination of such a central figure, who had led the organization for over 3 decades, was a devastating blow to Iran's most important proxy and a clear signal of Israel's new, more aggressive strategy. This period was also marked by the dramatic weakening of Iran's regional network. The war in Gaza severely degraded Hamas's military capabilities. In Syria, the fall of the Assad regime, a key Iranian ally, represented a major strategic setback for Tehran, depriving it of a critical land bridge to Lebanon and a forward base against Israel. This collapse of its proxy network created what Israeli strategists perceived as a window of opportunity. With Iran's allies in disarray and its regional influence waning, Israel calculated that the moment was right to confront the source of the problem directly: Iran's nuclear program and its military leadership on Iranian soil. The final steps toward open conflict occurred in late 2024. In October, Israel conducted a daring and complex operation that destroyed a key strategic air defense system near Tehran. This attack was a clear message that Israel had the capability to penetrate Iran's airspace and strike at its most sensitive sites. Iran responded with a missile barrage, part of which saw a ballistic missile strike a building in Hod Hasharon, a suburb of Tel Aviv, demonstrating its own reach. This direct exchange of fire across sovereign territories marked the definitive end of the shadow war. The conflict was no longer being fought through intermediaries or in secret. It was now out in the open, setting the stage for an unprecedented military confrontation. The simmering conflict erupted into sustained direct warfare in June 2025. This marked the first time in the history of the two nations that they engaged in overt and prolonged military strikes against each other's home territories. The catalyst was a series of massive Israeli airstrikes launched between June 13th and June 16th, based on intelligence that Iran had resumed its weapons group activities, the final practical steps toward building a nuclear weapon. Codenamed Operation Final Warning, the Israeli campaign was designed to inflict a devastating blow on Iran's nuclear infrastructure and military-industrial complex, aiming to set back its nuclear ambitions by years, if not a decade. The shadow war was over. A hot war had begun. To carry out these strikes, the Israeli Air Force deployed its most advanced aircraft, including F-35 Wayadea stealth fighters, F-15I Ram Strike Eagles, and F-16I Sufa jets. These planes flew hundreds of sorties, penetrating deep into Iranian airspace, which had been left more vulnerable after the October 2024 destruction of its primary air defense hub. The aircraft were armed with powerful munitions, including GBU-28 bunker buster bombs, specifically designed to destroy heavily fortified underground targets. The primary targets were the nuclear facilities at Natanz and Esfahan, which the IAEA later confirmed had been hit. The strikes also targeted military command centers, missile production plants, and key energy infrastructure across the country. Iran's response was swift and furious. It launched its own campaign, dubbed Operation Severe Punishment, unleashing hundreds of ballistic missiles and one-way attack drones toward Israel. For the first time, Iran deployed its new Fatah hypersonic missiles, which are designed to evade traditional missile defense systems. Sirens wailed across Israel as its multi-layered air defense network, including the Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow systems, worked overtime to intercept the incoming barrage. While the majority of projectiles were intercepted, some managed to get through, causing damage and casualties and bringing the reality of war home to Israeli civilians in a way not seen since the Gulf War of 1991. The human cost of this new phase of the conflict quickly became apparent. In Iran, the Israeli airstrikes resulted in significant casualties. Official reports stated over 200 people were killed, though some international sources estimated the death toll to be much higher, possibly exceeding 600, as strikes hit facilities in populated areas. In Israel, at least 24 people were killed by Iranian missile and drone attacks. The sustained, direct exchange of fire created a state of high alert in both nations, disrupting daily life, straining emergency services, and instilling a deep sense of anxiety as citizens on both sides faced the unprecedented reality of direct state-on-state warfare. The eruption of open war between Iran and Israel sent shockwaves across the globe, prompting immediate and urgent reactions from world powers. The United States, Israel's most crucial ally, found itself in a difficult position. The Trump administration, in power in 2025, had long been aligned with Israel's goal of preventing a nuclear Iran. However, it had consistently expressed a preference for achieving this through sanctions and pressure rather than direct military conflict. As Israeli jets struck Iran, Washington was forced to balance its steadfast support for Israel's security with its desire to avoid being drawn into a wider, more devastating regional war that could have catastrophic consequences for the global economy. In the immediate aftermath of the Israeli strikes, the US provided critical support for Israel's operations without directly joining the fighting. The Pentagon deployed KC-46 and KC-135 refueling tankers to help Israeli aircraft conduct their long-range missions. It also extended the deployment of 2 carrier strike groups, led by the USS Harry S. Truman and the USS Carl Vinson, in the region to deter any further escalation and protect international shipping lanes. President Trump publicly blamed Iran for the conflict, citing its nuclear provocations, and stated that he was considering joining the Israeli campaign. This declaration put immense pressure on Tehran, while keeping all American options on the table. The international community was deeply divided. European nations, which had worked for years to preserve the 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal, expressed grave concern over the escalation. They called for an immediate ceasefire and a return to diplomacy, fearing the conflict could spiral out of control, destabilize global oil markets, and trigger a massive humanitarian crisis. Russia and China, which have closer ties to Iran, condemned the Israeli strikes as a violation of international law and sovereignty. They called for restraint on all sides but primarily blamed Israeli aggression for pushing the region into open conflict, using the crisis as an opportunity to criticize US policy in the Middle East. The nuclear dimension of the conflict caused particular alarm. The IAEA's declaration on June 12, 2025, that Iran was in non-compliance with the NPT was a pivotal moment. After the Israeli strikes hit its nuclear sites at Natanz and Esfahan, Iran responded by threatening to withdraw from the NPT entirely. This threat raised the terrifying prospect of Iran pursuing a nuclear weapon without any international oversight whatsoever. The IAEA confirmed the strikes but reported no elevated levels of radiation, offering a small measure of relief. Nevertheless, the attack on nuclear facilities and Iran's reaction created a dangerous new precedent that left the world watching anxiously. Beyond the strategic calculations and geopolitical maneuvering, the escalation to open war has exacted a heavy and immediate toll on the ordinary people of both Iran and Israel. For civilians, the abstract conflict of headlines and political statements has become a terrifying reality of air raid sirens, explosions, and profound uncertainty about the future. Daily life in both nations has been fundamentally altered, governed by fear and the constant threat of attack from the sky. The war is not just being fought between armies and governments. It is being experienced in homes, schools, and workplaces by millions of people who are caught in the crossfire of a conflict they did not choose. In Iran, the Israeli airstrikes have brought destruction and death to a population already struggling under the weight of economic sanctions and political repression. While the strikes targeted military and nuclear sites, many of these facilities are located near urban centers. The resulting explosions and debris have caused civilian casualties and damaged homes and infrastructure. The mood within the country is complex. There is widespread anger at Israel for the attacks, but there is also significant public frustration directed at the Iranian regime. Many citizens blame their own government for prioritizing its confrontational foreign policy over the safety and well-being of its own people, and for failing to protect them from a predictable retaliation. In Israel, the constant threat of Iranian missile and drone attacks has shattered the nation's sense of security. While its advanced air defense systems have been remarkably effective, they are not infallible. The successful strikes that have occurred, like the one in Hod Hasharon, have caused death and destruction, serving as a powerful reminder of the country's vulnerability. Life has been punctuated by frantic dashes to bomb shelters, school closures, and the pervasive anxiety of waiting for the next siren. Despite the fear, there is broad public support for the government's military action. which is widely seen as a necessary defensive war to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran from threatening the country's very existence. The conflict's impact has rippled across the wider region, compounding existing crises. In Gaza, there are fears that the world's attention will be diverted from the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe there, leaving its population even more isolated. The weakening of Iran and the collapse of its proxy network have reshaped regional power dynamics. But this has come at a high cost, with instability spreading across Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. The war has also affected the global economy. While Israel has thus far avoided striking Iran's main oil export terminals to prevent a spike in global energy prices, the risk of disruption to shipping in the vital Strait of Hormuz remains a constant threat, keeping markets on edge. As of June 2025, the conflict between Iran and Israel has entered its most dangerous and unpredictable chapter. The long era of shadow warfare, defined by covert actions and proxy battles, has given way to direct, state-on-state military confrontation. Israeli airstrikes have significantly damaged Iran's nuclear and military infrastructure, achieving their short-term goal of setting back Tehran's programs. In response, Iran has demonstrated its ability to strike Israeli territory with ballistic and hypersonic missiles, proving that it can inflict a painful cost. Both sides have crossed lines that were once considered inviolable, and they now stand on the precipice of a much wider and more destructive war. The immediate challenge is de-escalation. The international community, led by the United States and other global powers, is desperately trying to pull both nations back from the brink. The risks of continued conflict are immense, not only for Iran and Israel, but for the entire world. A full-scale war could devastate the regional economy, trigger a global oil crisis, and lead to a humanitarian catastrophe on an unimaginable scale. The greatest fear remains the nuclear dimension. With Iran threatening to leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty and pursue a weapon without any constraints, the stakes could not be higher. Preventing this outcome is the foremost priority for international diplomacy. The future of the region is being redrawn in real time. The axis of resistance that Iran spent decades building has been severely degraded, with Hamas battered in Gaza, Hezbollah weakened in Lebanon, and the Assad regime gone from Syria. This creates a new strategic landscape, but one that is fraught with instability. The power vacuums left in the wake of this collapse could be filled by other extremist groups, leading to new cycles of violence. The fate of the people in these shattered states, particularly in Gaza and Syria, hangs in the balance as the world's great powers focus on the central conflict between Iran and Israel. Ultimately, the path forward remains unwritten. The current state of open warfare is unsustainable for both nations. The question is whether this crisis will force a new understanding and a return to some form of deterrence, or if it will serve as the opening act of an even larger tragedy. The people of Iran and Israel, along with the rest of the world, can only watch and hope that leadership and diplomacy prevail over the logic of escalation. The decisions made in the coming weeks and months will determine whether the Middle East descends further into chaos or finds a fragile path back towards stability in a region that has known too little of it.